don't have corrosive somehow. Wait, what? Excuse me?
But that's alright.
Oh my god! Yo guys, what is up? Moxsy on Borderlands 3 video, and today we are taking a look at every single weapon that was buffed in yesterday's hotfix and letting you guys know if the buff was good, if it was significant, and if these weapons are now worth using, or if they are still bad and you should not use. We've got a lot to talk about, so we're gonna get right into it. If you guys do enjoy the video, be sure to drop a like, comment, and subscribe. And with that, let's get right into it. Alright guys, before we dive into all of these weapons, I need to say how I tested them. Now, I tested them primarily, all these weapons, on Flak. I felt like Flak was a good middle ground character to test these weapons on because Zane is in a current crazy state of damage and Moze has double skagged in. So most of the testing on Flak, but there were weapons that stood out on Moze and stood out on Zane that I will mention. But just so you guys know, if something is good on Zane doesn't mean that the weapon is necessarily good. It just... Zane is freaking crazy right now. So starting us off is the Hydra Frost. Hydra Frost got pretty cool changes. The big thing with the Hydra Frost for me is that it just runs out of ammo so quickly. It's kind of like the Tizzy, but with less damage and slightly less ammo consumption. But when I was using this thing, basically every time that I started to use it, I was out of ammo before I killed everything that I needed to kill, and that frustrates me. So cool pistol, but I'm not going to be using this thing really anytime soon just because of its ammo consumption. Next up, we have the Scoville. Now, the Scoville only got its ammo consumption reduced from 4 to 2. However, new things have been added into the game since the last time I used this, such as Moze with double Skagden, big surplus, fire in the Skagden, and then Zane using the duct tape mod skill so that he can't take self damage. This thing running around shooting it at your feet with Zane and a non-elemental variant 200 splash firing out the mantis cannon is absolutely ridiculous. And with big surplus and fire in the Skagden on Moze using the Molotov Moze build, if you guys haven't seen that, one's crazy. Using the Scoville was a ton of fun and just output crazy DPS. So I've been loving the Scoville, but it really didn't change. We just got some new things in the game that make it better. Next up, we got the Little Yeti. Little Yeti got a decent buff. This thing still feels worse than the Maggie, in my opinion. There are some really good pistol buffs, but I personally probably still not going to be using this thing. It does feel better. I just don't think that it can compete with the Maggie still, even though it does have higher card base damage now than the Maggie. Next up, we have the Love Drill. Now, this is going to be in my top 3, I would say, weapon buffs. I've been using a 390 Love Drill, and the increased damage on its double damage shock thing is very noticeable and hits like a truck when it procs. Like I said, I was talking about Zane. This with Zane and his crit builds, where you're just spamming Mantis Cannon, building up a ton of gun damage. One shot's pretty much everything and was a ton of fun. The only thing I don't like about this weapon is the little freaking diamond. Makes it kind of difficult to see, but very satisfying weapon and is going to probably be in my top 3 or top 4 weapons from this hotfix. So make sure to give the Love Drill a try. Next up, we got the Lucky 7. Lucky 7 didn't have anything changed besides its chance to roll the perks. I still, like, when I use the Lucky 7, I'm only going to be using it when I roll, like, pretty much all the perks. So, it in theory, it changed the amount of time that you had to sit here and do this, but nothing too major. If you are running a Lucky 7 build, maybe this will save you a little bit of time, but yeah, it's still the same Lucky 7. You just get the perks more often. Next up, we have the Cheap Tips. Now, the Cheap Tips, for me, feels slightly worse than the Bitch when it's not buffed. It got more chance to drop these casino chips. These chips were dropping like crazy when I was using it. And then when I got the chips on it, it felt considerable in damage and similar to the Smog when buffed. Is pretty cool. You could use it with the clone if you'd like to. It did solid damage. The only thing is we currently have the Flipper and the Plasma Coil in the game. Two crazy strong SMGs that this one can't really compete with, but it was performing pretty well, and the casino mechanic is pretty cool. So good on them. Next up, we have the Boomer. Now, I think the Boomer stinks on everyone except for Moze. On the test that I did with this thing, the biggest issue is its magazine is done before a lot of the times you've killed someone, and on flak using this, I was dumping 4 to 5 magazines on an enemy before they died, which is just not what you want to be doing. On Moze, it was doing solid work, still nowhere close to like Flipper Plasma Coil levels of damage, but it was definitely usable, and I'm glad that they buffed this weapon because it's a really cool weapon. Next up, we have the Ion Laser. I was very underwhelmed. Another weapon. Very underwhelmed by this thing still, except for when using it on Moze. This thing on Moze, the Ion Laser got buffed, I think, fairly recently, and it just got another buff. This thing on Moze absolutely shreds because of all of Moze's splash damage, the longer firing, and just being able to spam this mode was absolutely decimating enemies with the Ion Laser. However, I don't really think it's too worth using on the other characters just because they have better options, and it's awkward to use on the other characters. So that and the Boomer are going to be my main, use this on Moze weapons. Next up, we have the Embers Purge. Now, the Embers Purge, I made a video on this weapon. I think I made a video on this weapon a while ago, and the puddle that the Embers Purge creates, when you give it to clone, the puddle gets mayhem environmental damage scaling, and then you give it to the clone, and it gets clone's action skill damage scaling. And this puddle with the buff, because they buffed the damage of the lava puddle, was hitting for upwards of 75 million damage a tick, and is a absolute star of these hotfix buffs. 75 million damage. I gave this thing to the clone in True Guardian Takedown, and even on armored enemies, this fire pool was hitting for 20 million damage a tick. Embers Purge on clone is amazing. I wouldn't really use it on the other characters besides giving it to clone because it just doesn't seem to be as impactful when you're not getting that action skill damage scaling on it. But Embers Purge in the hand of clone is definitely a top pick for clone weapons, and I was having an absolute blast with this. In addition to that, it does area of effect damage, and the clone can't kill itself with the Embers Purge, which is just icing on the top of that. Next up, we have the Soul Render. Now, of the two buffs for universal weapons, the Soul Render and the Clairvoyance are going to be my two top ones. Everyone knows that the Clairvoyance, very strong assault rifle, so was the Soul Render. The Clairvoyance got a buff when, honestly, it probably didn't need it. And this thing was hitting like a truck, whether you're using a Gatlin variant, a Masher variant. I was just rocking this with 390, hitting for more base damage than a sniper rifle with an assault rifle that has stickies that ricochet to other enemies. Clairvoyance is absolutely awesome, but of the two that were buffed, I've actually been preferring the Soul Render. The Soul Render's mechanic is that it shoots the skulls. The skulls damage got buffed, and the skulls from the Soul Render, when they hit things, it absolutely decimates them. It's very, very satisfying, and they do significant damage. Of the characters I tested this on, Zane and Moze take the cake on the Soul Render. Moze with her Fire in the Skag Den doubling with Big Surplus makes the skulls hit for stupid amounts of damage, and then Zane is Zane. It was really strong on Zane, so definitely recommend checking out both of these weapons on pretty much all of the characters. On Amara as well. I honestly didn't do much testing on Amara, but these weapons on Amara should be very nice. Next up, we have the Diddle. Diddle only got a 20% buff. This thing is duty still. I don't know what's going on with the frames there. Flame of Diddle, bad, don't use, do not recommend, don't touch this thing. Next up, we have the Heartbreaker. Now, the Heartbreaker got the largest numerical buff out of any of the weapons with 130% damage increase on the Heartbreaker. This thing feels like what the Butcher should be doing, but it heals you now. And across the characters, I have to say that this is going to be a flak weapon. The healing felt really good. I was having no problem staying alive with flak, and flak multi-pellet shotguns is just great synergy. This thing was doing absolute work for me on flak, and I think you could use it on flak for a... It's not the strongest hitting weapon. It's really not super strong hitting, but flak can make it work, and you're also going to be getting a significant portion of healing from it, which I definitely recommend checking out. Next up, we have the Slow Hand. Now, Slow Hand, Moxsy weapon, splash variant. Slow Hand was doing okay. I honestly wasn't overly impressed with this across any of the characters. The best one being Moze, just because it's a way to apply Fire in the Skag Den and big surplus, but generally still underwhelmed with this weapon. You can do good things with it on Moze, but I do think that there are better options. What do we have left? The Insider only got a 4% buff. I didn't even bother testing that. Insider is a good weapon. It's still probably going to be good, but it only got a 4% buff, and that's not worth it. The Creamer, this weapon did not receive the buff that it was intended to get. The buff did not apply, so Creamer's still the same. And then lastly, we have the Auto Aim. This weapon is still dookie, in my opinion. You can do some things with flak on it if you really want, but like, why would you use this weapon when like the Boogeyman exists? It's just pretty underwhelming, and I didn't like it. Guys, that is it for the video. I hope you enjoyed it. We talked about all of the weapons. There was a lot here. A lot of effort went into the testing. So if you enjoyed the video, if you found it helpful, be sure to drop a like, comment, and subscribe. And guys, I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace!